but he asked me to take a look at Astana, Kazakhstan. Now, this city has recently been renamed Nur Sultan after the president who served there, I think back in like 2018, 2019. So they have changed the name of Astana to Nur Sultan. And I'm guessing probably the reason why they changed the name is because when you scramble the name Astana, of course it spells Asatan, doesn't it? Now, that's not the only reason why we're looking at this today, because we found something else in the landscape. And we found this years ago, and I don't think we were the ones who originally found it, but we were the ones who actually found the alignments of this site in Astana, Kazakhstan. And what it is, this is an entire palace complex. Now, the scale of this thing is massive. We're talking thousands of acres of these crazy palaces and towers and buildings. And as we begin to break this down, you'll see that something emerges out of the landscape. Well, we see a needle, a hypodermic needle. Now, this isn't just any hypodermic needle. This is a needle used to insert RFID chips. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this. You can see this. And then we're going to get into the feathered serpent aspect to this as well, because that is also in the landscape. Let me zoom this up so you can see that this point here culminates in a pyramid, as do many other of these needles that we found in the landscape all around the world. So here's the pyramid here. And I want you to understand that these are not just arbitrary lines. These are outlines of specific streets and structures within this government complex that seem to create the shape of an RFID needle. Now, how could this be? Well, we know how it can be, because this is their end game, isn't it? Let me toggle this on and off for you. Oops, that's not the one. Here it is. So you can see the shape emerge there. So as you can see, all I did was outline these buildings. Now I'm trying to do a better job of actually showing you how these lines, we came about these lines. Because, there are the naysayers out there that said, well, what are you drawing lines around? Well, I'm showing you. Let me toggle it on and off again. As you can see, there's a clear delineation of what appears to be a needle. Now, as I said, we had found these needles pretty much all over the world. In fact, most of you are the ones that actually found them, not me. You're like, hey, Casey, you got to look at this one and this one. We found them in Seattle. We found them in Lower Manhattan, in Central Park. We found them in Paris. Now I'm going to do a wide angle view so that you can see and compare the needle that's obviously there to the needle next to it, which is just to give you a reference point. And as I toggle it on and off, you can see what was outlined. Now, what does all this mean? Well, let's go down here and see if we can figure this out, because all of this centers around a single feathered serpent. Let's zoom this up so you guys can see the feathered serpent. Now, this is it here, and it is the tip, or not the tip, but it is in the needle. And as you can see, there's a winged creature here with a serpent in the middle of it. Now this serpent is submerged. You can see the head here twisting around in the Ouroboros shape. And this serpent is submerged underneath like this pond. And you can only really see it when this pond is dry. And here's where you really get a feeling for the scale of these grounds and these gardens, where all of this is drawn into the landscape. This must have cost billions of dollars. Unending wealth to create this. Here you see the tongue is like lightning. And the serpent underneath the surface. And of course the feather in the back here, in this back portion. Now this was one of the first major discoveries on this channel. I think we discovered this in 2012 or 2013. This feathered serpent aspect to these grounds. And you can go back on this channel to the history and you can see this. I think it's under lines of death, I think we called them. We found all these lines going across the planet or the plane. And we were looking at where these lines were pointing to. And the grounds on this particular image here point to actually the feathered serpent in Mesoamerica. Look at this line here. See this white line? Let me zoom it up a little bit. You're going to see a red line next to this white line. Let me turn it around here. We're going to follow this line across the world. And as you can see, it's a parallel line. It's a line. It's pointing somewhere, isn't it? Well, in 2012 or 2013, we found where that line was pointing to. And anybody can do this in Google Earth. Now, for the naysayers there that say this line points anywhere, no. It points on a set path and only intersects with a very, 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 very small portion of the planet. This one, this line, happens to point all the way across the world to the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Mesoamerica, right to the front door. This line here is where it points to. So there's obviously some kind of connection to these two sites, isn't there? Now, who is the feathered serpent? Well, the feathered serpent is Quetzalcoatl, isn't he? The crowned serpent. The corona serpent. And it's always been about two fangs piercing you. It's always been about two shots piercing you. The coronation of the serpent. Remember the crowned serpent we found in the film I Am Legend? When the cobra Mustang, the serpent cobra, pulls in underneath the crown as Will Smith is chasing deer. And then we found that those deer were running into these cars that looked like a winding serpent. It was all right there, hiding in plain sight, wasn't it? We also found a crowned serpent in the redesign of the Handy Sook School. We're going to look it up right now since we're here. Let's see if it shows up here. I'll show you the crowned serpent there. Why would they redesign a school to look like a crowned serpent where something so dark happened? Let's turn off the history here. Spin this around. And everybody sees the crowned serpent as I spin this up here. You can see the snout of the serpent. You can see the crowning on the top of his head. This is bragging. You can see the eye of the serpent here, the snout and the crown above on top, and it's slithering around here. A crowned cobra. Now, let's go back here. Now, what was this all about? Well, this has been going on for many, many years. Blind 11 was the segue to our loss of freedoms. Then electronic medical records, And then Vidco and the smack scenes. It was all planned. It was all planned. So, we have continuity, don't we? We have a progression of plans that brought us to where we are now with these mass injections, don't we? All going back to the Patriot Act. Now, we're going to cover that in the film Enemy of the State. That's coming up on Monday. But this was an amazing find by Walter. I had looked at this Astana, Kazakhstan many, many times and never noticed the needle right there in the landscape. Now, as I said, we've identified many of these needles across the world. Seattle, Paris, Manhattan, San Francisco. All those videos are up here on the channel for you to check out. And it's weird because most times the tip of these is a pyramid or an obelisk. In the case of Washington, D.C., the tip of that needle is the Washington Monument. In the case of San Francisco, the tip of that needle is the Pyramid Building, the Transamerica Building. And here, of course, in Kazakhstan, the tip is a pyramid as well. Now, I found another aspect to the syringe, because it isn't just about smack scenes. See these curved fingers? This curved part where the plunger is? Let's zoom in on it, because I want you to remember what you're looking at here, because now your mind is going to be blown away. And praise God for revelations like this, because this has got to be one of the most chilling discoveries out there in terms of the truth movement. I'm now going to take you to Dealey Plaza. And there, halfway around the world, the very same fingers of the needle, the RFID needle plunger, in the very spot where JFK was assassinated. Now, what makes this very troubling is that there is something about this event. There was a man carrying an umbrella. Syringe umbrella confirmed on this bus stop art in New York City. And I want to thank the subscriber that sent this to me. As you see the syringe here becoming the umbrella, which is what we told you the symbolism was all pointing to. So they know about this stuff. Now, there's a caption at the bottom of this artwork. And basically, it's an artist. This is from New York City at a bus stop. Let's look at some of the symbolism here. We have a tongue coming out of this creature on the left. It almost looks like a frog. The umbrella, of course, and the hypodermic needle being held by whatever this god is or something. Almost has an Indian feel to it, doesn't it? You have Apollo in the corner, of course, which is the bearer of all of this. And he's holding on to what appears to me to be a bunch of people holding the world under this umbrella of smaccination. What's at the feet of this thing? Well, creatures of some kind, and hands clasped in prayer. Now, these scenes were taken from this website, but someone had seen this on the street, so I had to track down this website. As you can see, it says Pushpa Kamari, Joy of Living, is the name of this piece of art. Let's see if I could zoom. I can't really zoom that up because of the way this website is built, but it says it down here in the corner. Pushpa Kamari, Joy of Living 2021. This art was done courtesy Pushpa, Kumari, and Gofa. Photo by David Sampson, courtesy of Public Art Fund, New York. And so it's from this site here, and as you can see, there was a bunch of artwork done for all of these bus stops. Many of these bus stops throughout New York City. About the exhibition, shared vulnerability has united the world, yet the spam-demic has also revealed and sharpened many divisions. Both direct and indirect effects have been unequally distributed among demographic groups, communities, and regions. After a second year of the spam-demic, how do we begin to understand our reshaped lives and world? So at least one other artist is either in the know or saw the connection between the hypodermic needle and the umbrella, both sharing a piece of equipment, a ferrule, which is the tip of the umbrella, and also a piece inside of a hypodermic needle. There was a man carrying an umbrella. A man carrying an umbrella.
It's working! It's working! It's
And there were theories as to what all that meant. In fact, they believed that there was a poison dart. Now, let me show you that here, because you're not going to believe this. They believed there was a poison dart. That either incapacitated, these are theories, of course, but this is a real thing. Here's the site here, decoding the Kennedy assassination. And as you can see here, the theory is that an umbrella was used. There wasn't a cloud in the sky as President Kennedy's motorcade made its way through Dallas. But on the sidewalk, one man held an open black umbrella above his head. Why? Was it a signal to an assassin? Was the umbrella itself a weapon? It sounds unlikely, but it's not completely bizarre. Umbrellas that fired poison darts were used as weapons during the Cold War. And here's a diagram of this poison dart shooting out of the side here through a hole. This is an actual device. Forensic evidence ruled out the dart theory since nobody in the car was hit by one, but this signal idea wasn't debunked until the umbrella man identified himself to the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1979. Now, this is a real thing because it is said that another individual was taken out by a poison dart from an umbrella. And now you're starting to see the picture come together, because Umbrella Man at the JFK assassination was really a signal for the future mass smaccination of the world. Umbrellas are hypodermic needles, aren't they? Based on the research that we've done, they're one and the same. They share similar parts in their design. The ferrule, which is the tip of the umbrella. There's also a ferrule in a hypodermic needle. A Bulgaria umbrella is an umbrella with a hidden pneumatic mechanism which injects a small poisonous pellet containing ricin. It has a hollowed stock in which the pellet neatly sits. Such an umbrella was used in name for the assassination of Bulgarian dissident writer Georgy Markov. Hit with a poison umbrella dart. So, this stuff is real. Needle umbrella confirmed. Now, Monday we're going to take a look at Enemy of the State with Will Smith, which is all about a congressman who's killed with a syringe. There's umbrellas. They even say the words and the date, Blind 11, before it ever happened. 3 years before it happened. That'll be Monday's show. So now you're starting to see that as knowledge increases in these last days, we're unlocking the keys to more and more of the plans of the enemy, aren't we? And the Bible tells us that this will happen. Let me zoom this out so you guys can see the whole thing of this. Now, when I saw this, the way this worked was with this Dealey Plaza JFK assassination thing is you guys kept on me. You're like, Casey, you got to check out or look into the Umbrella Man from the JFK assassination. I'm like, chances of that connecting into all this are probably close to none. In my mind, this is what I was saying. Because, you know, that's a long time ago, and really, I don't think that it had anything to do with smaccinations. And so this is what I was thinking. But then I went to the site, and there is the finger holders of the hypodermic needle, and I was like, it's all connected. They were telling us that umbrellas are needles, and then all the rest of the puzzle pieces fit together at that point. Now, what else do we have here? As we examine the RFID smack-scene syringe written right into the landscape, this was obviously part of their future plans for a very long time. Now, interestingly, these proof videos that we've done on the smaccination needles in the landscape, they're sitting at very low views, you guys. 5,000-6,000 views. I don't know why, but this is one of the most major discoveries on this channel in a long time, and it should be seen by millions of people. I don't know how we're going to make that happen. I know you guys are doing everything you can. I've tried to fix my videos to make them more viral friendly, but we're not breaking through. It's pretty much the same people that we've had on the channel for the last year. We're stuck. So I don't know how to break outside of that. I don't know if other people on other channels with much larger truth subscribers need to hear it. I go on other channels and I don't recognize anybody in the comment section of other channels, which tells me there are a lot of people that either don't know about us or simply are not finding the channel. So that is the Umbrella Man that was present on the sunny day that JFK was assassinated. Immobilized possibly by a poison dart or even killed by it, who knows. Others say that this Umbrella Man signaled the shooter. Either way, it's just really, really weird, isn't it? Now, what else do we have here? Now, I have a few headlines I want to go over today. I'm going to go ahead and close Google Earth so we don't get messed up. I have a few headlines we're going to go over. Oh, here's the Wikipedia page on the Umbrella Man, so you know it's not just some made-up story. They identified him as Louis Stephen Witt. He was the Umbrella Man. I think this is the picture here. They actually show the umbrella in this picture. That might be him right here. But basically what they say here is he appears in the Zapruder film and several other films and photographs near the Stemmons freeway sign within Dealey Plaza during the assassination of JFK. And the guy says there was nothing going on. In fact, he says that the reason why he had the umbrella was to mock the president, because this was some kind of a sign or symbolism. Symbolism that was supposed to mock the president, because the president's father had basically, what do they call it? Appeased Bette Midler, that person. And because of that, this umbrella was supposed to represent mockery. This was actually used before against Neville Chamberlain. People would pull out umbrellas and wave these black umbrellas. Think of the ramifications of that. Think of all the experiments that the Yahtzees were doing, using needles. So maybe that's what this was really about. But that was the excuse that the Umbrella Man gave. He died not too long ago in 2014, November 17th, just days before the anniversary of the assassination. Crazy, right? Today we're going to break down Enemy of the State. Now, for those of you that have been on this channel for a while, you will remember that we did screen this film and we decoded it years ago. I can't remember exactly how it went down, but had a lot to do with Blind 11, of course. Anyway, let's get into this decode here because this is unbelievable. Now, from my memory, when we did this the first time, when we decoded this the first time, of course, we talked about Blind 11, which, as you will hear later in the film, is spoken. The birth date of Blind 11 is actually spoken as one of these actors is discussing the surveillance police state. Now, this movie was pre-Blind 11, which makes it very, very creepy and cryptic. It was also pre-Patriot Act as well. But yet you're going to see all these references that seem to be pointing forward to what they knew they were going to do and enforce on our nation. So let me give you the backdrop of this film before we get into some of these scenes. Let me make sure we're connected. All right, looks like we got good sound. Everybody's starting to filter in. So Will Smith is actually in this film. And in fact, this film was one that one of you, I think it was Geo something, YouTube channel, asked me to take a look at this. Okay, so you got to look at Enemy of the State because there's umbrellas in it and there's syringes and all kinds of stuff. And so I'm glad that I looked at it. Now, let's get into some of this here and talk about this, the backdrop of this film. So Will Smith plays an attorney and his wife is kind of like us. She's basically a truther. She talks about the, all these conspiracies and things that we often talk about the surveillance state and how that infringes on our privacy rights. Well, what happens is Will Smith unknowingly receives a videotape, and on the videotape, it is the murder of a congressman by the deep state. It takes place at like a duck pond, and they thought nobody was around, but in fact, some guy had a camera set up to watch birds that he picks up, kind of like a trail cam, and it picks up this murder. So the deep state goes after Will Smith in an attempt to destroy his credibility and his life. They cut off his credit cards and everything. And they try to make him look guilty. They try to pin another murder on him, and this keeps going on and on and on. So let's open this up and start to take a look at this. This montage that I put together. Genesis Revelation was the one that wanted me to look at Enemy of the State again. So hats off to Genesis Revelation. I believe that was who asked me to do it. Now, let's go ahead and fire this up. This is crazy. Watch and listen very closely.
This bill is not the first step to the surveillance society. It is the surveillance society.
This bill isn't the first step in the surveillance society. It is the surveillance society. And you're going to hear them talk about this Privacy Act. And this has to be the Patriot Act. It just has to be. Before it ever was, I don't know if it was conceived yet. I don't know if the Patriot Act was being talked about before Blind 11. But this is crazy. 1998, you guys.
Telecommunications Security and Privacy Act. Invasion of privacy is more like it.
Here's the syringe in the neck. This is when they take out the congressman. And across the pond is a trail cam that picks up the murder.
Shows the death of Congressman Hammersley. The needle behind the ear. 3 faces readily identifiable.
The needle behind the ear. So they talk about, let me turn the sound down because it looked like you guys are getting blasted out over there. So that, of course, was Gene Hackman, very popular actor in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s. And he's talking about how the congressman was killed, needle behind the ear. And here you see the umbrella. Now, the umbrella is front and center prominently. We talked about the umbrella and what this actually means. The umbrella is the syringe. They share the same parts. This is their metaphor for syringes and hypodermic needles. So whenever you see the umbrella like this, typically that's what they're talking about. Let's keep watching here. Now, you saw the dog run across the umbrella. That has significance as well, as you'll see later, because it's all about rabies. Rabies injections. That's where all this is headed for the future of America. The zombie apocalypse. I don't know how it's going to happen, but this is where all the symbolism is pointing to. Going way back when. Now, as you're going to see very soon here, the characters in the film are going to begin to make the case that this act is necessary because of the danger of foreign nationals who hate America and the threat that they pose to America and to our country. Literally the playbook that we would watch unfold 3 years after this film was made. This was the case that they were making. And why do you think they're letting all these people in? It's to destabilize trust. That's exactly what it is used for. I was talking to someone the other day in California, and they said basically California has been overrun. It's been overrun. White people are now a minority in California. And so what do you think that's going to do politically? It will destabilize things. It has people angry at each other, blaming each other for things. And then you have the terrorist threat sprinkled in there with foreign nationals. And this is why they did it. The government did it. They allowed it so that they could destabilize trust and make you put all your trust in them. So the congressman is killed. He gets the needle behind the ear. And of course, that has to be the metaphor for the smack of the nation. And we saw the umbrella, the dog run across it. You're going to see a lot of dog cameos in this film, which of course mean rabies and zombies. So she walks into the shed, and this is where the umbrella is sitting, because she hears a sound or something, and it's Will Smith sneaking back into his own house because he has been tracked down. They can find him through satellite, helicopter, you name it, voice, sound. They're tracking him down. So the only thing he can do is pull all the trackers off of his body and sneak back into his house to find out why it is they're coming after him, because he doesn't know in the beginning. And then he figures it out. A guy basically who had the videotape of the murder, he got tracked down. They tried to kill him, and he's running for his life, and he runs into Will Smith just by accident in a lingerie shop. And he drops the tape into Will Smith's bag. Will Smith brings it home unknowingly, and that's when the chase is on to track down the enemy of the state, Will Smith. Let's keep watching here.
Georgie?
It's me.
Now, what I want you to notice about this umbrella is completely out of place in the script. There's no reason why this should be there. There's not raining outside. Okay? This is how you know what they're talking about in their symbolism. It's props. Props are very important. Prop masters, they're called.
Georgie?
It's me.
The needle behind the ear.
I got rabies or something. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Georgie?
It's me. I got rabies or something. I got rabies or something. I got rabies.
Again, completely just does not fit within the context. Like, why would they write that in the script? Well, now we know. Now you know why the dog ran across the umbrella. Because the dogs have rabies. Now, what makes all this really super creepy is that what I just explained to you was exactly the conclusion that we came to within the last 2 years about what this was all going to be about. And we came to those conclusions by watching their symbolism in their films, watching their script. And that is that the smack scene, and maybe even the virus, if it exists, will be injected into the world and cause rabies-like symptoms. We're already seeing people going bald, hair coming out. These are rabies-like symptoms. So, going back in time to when this film was made, it appears as though we nailed it, doesn't it? Now, of course, there are many, many more clues. I'm just showing you the most obvious one.
The needle behind the ear. The needle behind the ear.
Now, there's a scene where Will Smith and Gene Hackman are running for their lives after Gene Hackman's hideout gets discovered and he blows it up. We'll get into that a little bit later, but they're run through a mining operation. But this is also a metaphor for something else, isn't it? Something that we just discovered in the last few months. Let me zoom in on this image here. And let me go into the chat and see who gets the answer first. Thanks everybody for showing up. I like to do question and answer and make this a little bit more interactive for you guys. It serves a few purposes. First of all, other people can see that I'm not just making all this up. And it also helps legitimize this work. Because if there's no legitimacy to this work and people think this is just pareidolia or finding things where things are not, then all this work is for nothing, isn't it? So what did I just show you on the screen? Chris Quinn got it right. Buzzsaw. We were just talking about this, weren't we? The circular sawtooth. Now, this circular sawtooth is the central component in a machine called a willowing machine. What does willowing machine do? It processes the sheared wool from a sheep. In other words, it basically bald sheep, and this fits right into the rabies matrix, doesn't it? Losing of the hair. Well, the cutting and shearing of the sheep is symbolism for cutting off your connection to God. They want you to look at it. That's why the helicopter flew right in front of it. Now, this shape was prominent. This very same sawtooth, circular sawtooth shape was prominent on the Guinness clock above the umbrella and the syringe in this image here at the 1951 London Fair. Umbrella. There's the circular sawtooth of a willowing machine, which you're looking at on your screen right now. Now, these are fibers from something else, a plant, but the willowing machines are used also for wool as well. Also for cotton. Now, of course, Will Smith's daughter, who shears her head, and her mother, who shears her head, his daughter's name is Willow. Are you starting to see the fabric of this reality, the fabric of the Matrix, revealing itself on a spiritual level? Of course, one of you, once again, look at the sawtooth sun. Unbelievable. Something is happening here, isn't it? This is modern artwork on a bus terminal that one of you found. And there is the syringe and an umbrella, proving that we're not all crazy. We don't all have pareidolia. We don't all just make things up because it sounds great and sounds cool. Now, here's a wide-angle view of this Guinness clock, again from 1951, and all in one line. You see the sawtooth sun. This isn't a regular sun. These are all pointing in the same direction, aren't they? And the umbrella and what appears to be a syringe-like object in the bottom. Now, I know that's not really a syringe, but symbolically and spiritually, it is a syringe, as I just demonstrated to you, because umbrellas are syringes. They both have the same parts, which is the main part is a ferrule, the tip of the umbrella, and a piece inside of a hypodermic needle. Keep watching here. Now this woman is willowing wool. She's doing it by hand. This is how they originally started doing it. And then they realized that they could just put this thing on a cylinder and run it through a machine.
He is talking about ending personal privacy.
So she's like us. She ends up being right, but the damage has already been done, you guys. They've discredited people like us for seeing into the future of what these people are planning to do. And by the time we get to the future that we already knew was going to happen, it's already too late. And they still find a way to make us look crazy. We are already in a police state. Far worse than things were in the 80s. The higher, the more that the technology advances, the more security controls that they have, the more surveillance they're able to do, the more processing power, the more cameras. You guys, I grew up in a society where there were no cameras. The 80s, the only places that had cameras were banks, and that was inside. Nobody really had a camera outside in the 80s when I grew up. And yet here we are, and they're everywhere. Now, this next part, you're going to hear Will Smith make the argument for the elite. The very argument that they're trying to convince everybody. Will Smith makes the argument that people should have no problem being listened to if they aren't doing anything wrong, right? I've heard my mom use this argument before. She's like, Casey, why do you care if they're listening? You're not a teeterist. You're not going to go blow anything up. I go, Mom, you don't understand. The problem with that is we've already seen it happen in China. It's happening right now. You don't have to be a teeterist to get in trouble. These people have nothing better to do than to write tickets and citations and show up to your door and harass you. Take your children if they can. It's the unfair laws. And, you know, as it sits now, most laws are unenforceable or very rarely enforced. But once they have 100% efficiency at being able to enforce those laws, they don't need patrol cars anymore, do they? They go right to the crime, or right to what they call a crime, what they've deemed a crime. 100% policing efficiency. 100%. There is no more patrolling because the cameras and algorithms are doing that for them. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but over the last several decades, more and more unfair laws are becoming more and more common, aren't they? And then here's the other problem. As soon as their electric kingdom and their surveillance state is in place, guess what? They can make any law they want to now and enforce it 100%, and you won't even be able to object to it. You won't be able to say there's an unfair election. They'll call that disinfo, and they'll come to your house and tell you you can't say that. That's against the law. They'll make a law saying that you can't say disinformation. You see where all this is headed? And then there's no way out of it because guess what? You're under surveillance state. You can't even break these laws anymore if you wanted to. You can't even get out of it. You basically have to comply or you lose your freedom and you lose your money. So anytime someone tells you, if you're not doing anything wrong, what's the problem? You tell them exactly what I just told you. And that's when it will begin to sink in. And you tell them how things have already progressed. Let me give you a simple example. Look what radar, police, highway patrol radar has done to capturing speeders, right? Now, this is just one example. Growing up in the 70s and, or born in the 70s, but people that grew up in the 60s and 50s remember a time where there wasn't radar. So cops didn't just sit on the side of the road to catch speeders. And if they did, they only caught people going super, super fast that they could prove were speeding because they didn't have radar. And so now we've got a situation where cops will just sit and pick people off going 5 miles over the speed limit. That's an example of how technology has increased infractions and made it so that you can't do this or that, X or Y. Do you see the problem here? And this spills over into everything. Jaywalking. A camera catches you, and this is exactly what's happening in China right now. A camera catches you jaywalking, goes against your social credit score. And I could sit here for hours and list examples of how things have changed. And it's only going to get worse. We're at the beginning of something. We're actually about a quarter in the way through it. But it's only going to get worse. And next thing you know, you're going to be living in a place where if you walk out your door, because the average citizen breaks multiple laws every single day, it's just there's no one around to enforce it. But when we get to a day where you can't even walk outside of your door without thinking conscientiously about what you're going to do and make sure you don't break a law, that's when all of this will settle in and sink in. This is when you'll wish that you had stood up and said something. Not that it matters anymore, because I believe that all voting is fake anyway now. So even if you tried to vote for someone that you thought wasn't going to push this, it's already too late, you guys. They put in place who they want to be put in place. Look what happened in France. You guys, it was 2 years ago. The Yellow Vests, there were people in the streets opposed to Macron. Like 90% of people don't even like him. Not that Le Pen's any better, because again, they give us two choices that they know that they can control. That's who gets to get the chance to be elected, is people that they already have control over. But look at what happened there. Nobody likes him, you guys. How did he just win an election? We all know how he won. We all know how he won. People were not happy with being forced to have their businesses closed. Nobody liked him, and he still won. So, surveillance state is no good for anybody. I'd rather go it alone and protect my own property. Because the state can target anybody they want to for arrest. Especially people who they either don't want to come to power, or people that gain any kind of influence, or people that go against the national agenda that they have in store for the future. Let's say, for instance, you know, I love my gas stove. I don't want to go to an electric stove. So I'm going to speak out about that. I'm going to say, you know what, you guys? No, don't give up your gas stoves. Well, what if I started gaining some traction? And all of a sudden, millions and millions of people sided with me. Well, what do you think the police state, surveillance state would do? They would find some dirt on me and shut me down, wouldn't they? So now you're seeing the problem. Now listen to this part.
Do you want your phone tapped?
I'm not planning on blowing up the country.
And freedom have always existed in a very precarious balance. And when buildings start blowing up, people's priorities...
When buildings start blowing up? Are you kidding me? Which is exactly what happened 3 years later.
...tend to change.
Reynolds Thomas Bryan, born 9/11/40.
What?
Reynolds Thomas Bryan, born 9/11/40.
Blind 11/40.
Attended.
Look at his transfer date. That's the first day of Lupercalia. Remember I told you the two are interconnected? Lupercalia, the Wolf Festival, Ancient Roman Festival, Pagan Festival, and Blind 11. They're interconnected.
Episcopal School, D.C., B.A., Harvard, Ph.D., Princeton.
And when buildings start blowing up, and when buildings start blowing up, and when buildings start blowing up...
Then they show the hideout, Gene Hackman's hideout, falling into its own footprint after it was rigged with explosives. Because that's what burning buildings do, don't they? They fall inside their own footprint. Actually, they really don't. But this is what they're planting the seeds to accept what was going to happen. They usually fall sideways, because to fall in their own footprint, you would have to remove all the material and all the supports evenly and time it perfectly from the top of the building to the bottom of the building to make it fall in its own footprint.
What was happening?
Or you'd have to turn it to dust with some kind of weapon.
Blew up the building. Why? Because you made a phone call.
Let's back up here.
I blew up the building. Why? Because you made a phone call.
He goes, what's happening? He goes, I blew up the building. It's like, why? Because you made a phone call. Now let me break that down for you. Why would they say It's because he made a phone call. Well, we know what the script says. Will Smith stopped at a convenience store, and Will Smith wanted to contact his family, and he got on the payphone, and they were able to track him down and track them back to the hideout. Well, let me postulate a different story than the cover story that we're given here. It wasn't explosives at all that took down the building. It was actually a copper device. Tesla technology. Now, he's going to explain later that there was copper inside the building. Copper wire. Now, we know that telephone lines are copper, so he's basically giving away the true weapon that probably brought down the buildings. A copper device, as we had discovered 7 years ago. Now, before we finish this decode, one of you looked up some calendar dates surrounding some of the recent films that we've been decoding, and you began to notice patterns. Patterns that we're going to talk about right now. This is Omega Man, the movie. And Will Smith was in a movie called I Am Legend, which was the prequel. I'm sorry, Omega Man was the prequel to I Am Legend. Same exact plot. Will Smith is Charlton Heston. Okay? Now watch this. Looked at the release dates of these films. And what you have is, actually, I didn't look at this. Someone sent this to me. Gotta be clear here. There are 10,999 days before Blind 11 would happen that Omega Man was released. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you count the day and include the date of the calculation, then it's actually exactly 11,000 days. The odds of that happening are very slim to have the exact amount of days like that. You could also look at this 999 as a 666. Now, you might not accept that synchronicity and that coincidence, but this one will be more alarming and shocking. Charlton Heston died 3 months and 22 days before I Am Legend released. 3 months and 22 days before I Am Legend released. The very film that would be the sequel to the Charlton Heston film. Was this some kind of sacrifice? I don't know. He was old. 3 months, 22 days, 113 days. Now you're going to see this number 322 on Will Smith's watch. Will Smith wears 2 watches in the film. He wears a Casio and an Omega. Omega Man. So, it's 322 every time, isn't it? And this demonstrates some kind of order, doesn't it? Yes, it does. It demonstrates some kind of order. Now, here's another one. 33 months and 22 days between Enemy of the State and its release and Blind 11. Another 322. So now you're beginning to see this hidden framework, the order, the continuity to these films and events. I call it the Matrix because that's what it is. Now let's finish up this decode here because there's even more. If you're shocked now, it goes even deeper. Now we're going to back up a bit to this scene. And you see on the bottom of your screen it says telephone, internet, Blind 11, and Patriot Act. And what does all that mean? Well, you're probably asking, how is this surveillance state going to finally happen in its full form? Well, the only way it can happen is with an electric kingdom. Now, another revelation we've been talking about at length is this electric kingdom. And it was born out of the air. What do you mean, Casey? Well, I'm going to show you. The electric kingdom was born out of the air. The ruler of the air, of course, is Satan. So before you think I've gone mad, Let me explain. What you're looking at on your screen are air tubes. They were called pneumatic tubes. And these were the original arteries of communication. These were the very first networks. Air tubes, pneumatic tubes. And these were in the basements of many, many buildings. In fact, one of the main air tube, pneumatic tube hubs was in the basement of 40 Wall Street, which is the building that Thump owns. Now, that particular building has been viewed and seen in many, many films. They've showed this basement with the pneumatic tubes and a vault down there. And they would use these tubes to send money around near Wall Street. There was also one of these pneumatic tube systems underneath Paris as well. Look at these. Look at this. Look at the scope of this. These were the first networks. Now, these air tubes, as I said, were used to move money around, letters, but mostly it was about trade. It was about money. It was about moving money around quickly and efficiently and safely. Right? And these very same tubes would be the tubes that underground copper telephone lines would be run through. The pathway was already set. They simply pushed the line through these tubes. And then a generation later, they started pushing coaxial cables for cable and internet through these very same pathways. Then fiber optic lines. He shall transform himself into an angel of light. From ruler of the air, to the light, the fiber optic cable lines. Prophecy is being fulfilled. So now you see how the airwaves are really the deception. Airwaves and light waves are the deception, coming straight from the devil. Now, as soon as these networks were in place, the world was finally ready for the electric kingdom, which is the final cage. It will be our final prison. Now, this plan has been going on for a very, very long time, because what you're going to see next is proof that Bush was a key figure in all of this. Watch.
What the hell is happening? I blew up the building. Why? Because you made a phone call.
Now, we made this discovery probably 3 years ago. I'm showing you again a lot of new people on the channel. George Bush was born on the exact day and year that the center trade of the world was born. July 6th, 1946 was the day that Dewey, the governor, picks the board for the trade center. This was the infancy of it. Now, what are the odds of that? That he would share a birthday with the very place that would blow up under his presidency. How many years later? 1946 to, I guess that would be how old he is, right? I think the odds are probably 1,000,000,000 to 1. Unless there's some other plan behind all this, right? Now, Rockefeller was at the root of this plan for the center. And look at this. In the 1950s, David Rockefeller began floating the idea of a downtown World Trade Center. It would help revive the area's fortunes in an era when many companies were relocating to Midtown, as well as give a new home to the New York Stock Exchange. In theory, the complex was to be built on the East River near the Fulton Fish Market, which would not have affected Radio Row. As the WTC project was getting off the ground, Rockefeller created a new newspaper, the Downtown Courier, as a PR mouthpiece for the development. In 1959, the paper praised Radio Row which it recast as, you ready? Electronic City. Now, for those of you that have been following the channel closely and watching all the daily shows, you're probably getting chills right now, because we had just recoined the term Electric Kingdom within the last 4 or 5 months, haven't we? We did probably 5 shows on the Electric Kingdom, because we realized this is where everything was headed. They're trying to do away with natural gas. They're now demonizing natural gas. Natural gas used to be hailed as a clean energy, and now all of a sudden it's not so clean. They want everybody on the electric grid, electric stoves, electric this, electric that, electric heat, electric everything, so that they can simply turn it off and on when they want. They could set prices wherever they want and enslave you through your use of electricity. And make no mistake, by the end of all this, they will be determining how much electricity you get based on your social credit score. Never ever let a government centralize your energy into one place like that. That's basically shooting yourself in the foot. Now, how is this Electric City concept appearing in this completely separate research that we were doing about the origins of the Center for Trade of the World? And I'm scrambling the way I say that, because you're not allowed to say those 3 words in a row like that. You get flagged. It's already happening, you guys. We're already in a surveillance state. If I can't speak freely, but then you go to the mainstream news channels and they can speak freely and without getting canceled, that we're already here. It's just that right now they're focusing on people that have an audience. Pretty soon it's going to be every single person. Let's keep going. Now, the document you're looking at now is a document that I dug up from the original legislation from Bush's birthday and the establishment of the Center of the World of the Trade. And when I read through this document, my head almost exploded when I read what I'm about to show you next. Because what the document appears to say and disclose in 1946 is that the Center for Trade of America, the one that went up in flames, was fashioned after what's called a sample fare. And not just any sample fare, a particular sample fare. The document names it Leipzig. That was created by the Yazis. And it even says and mentions in this document the REICH. The document compares the TC, the WTC, to these fares, and it mentions the government of the REIC to the H and the Leipzig Fair. Now, this is shocking because what it suggests is that the very foundation of trade in this country was fashioned after what everybody's been trying to tell us all along. Remember Project Paperclip? Why would you bring people over from there? Why would you bring Yazis from there and put them in NASA and put them in our government and in our science, in our labs, in our pharmaceutical companies? Why would you do that? Well, this gives us another piece to the puzzle, doesn't it? Let's keep watching here. Now, of course, I'll link all these papers and everything so you guys can see this. So, I'm not making it up. Actually, you can see here, if you want to look this one up, I don't know if I kept the link to that, but just type in first report of the NYS legislature.pdf, and it should, here's the link here in case you want to, anthonywrobbins.com, because I don't think I did save this one, but you can type that in and find this very easily, okay? Now let's keep watching here, because they're going to mention the privacy bill again, and you're going to see the name Patriot on the ferry, obviously referencing the Patriot Act.
That this bill will in the end provide the kind of security that this...
What security? The kind of security he's going to need.
Does this mean the privacy bill is dead, Congressman?
In its current form, yes, but the...
Does this mean the privacy bill is dead, Congressman?
In its current form, yes, but the issue is still very much alive, I can assure you.
Privacy bill, privacy bill, privacy bill.
Obviously, they're talking about the Patriot Act. They were already drafting it. They already knew they were going to draft it because they already knew what they were going to do that would get them to be able to sign and get everyone to accept the Patriot Act. So let's get back to Gene Hackman's hideout before he blew it up. And you're going to hear him talk about telecommunications control. And we get more clues about the Patriot Act that would change America forever. Watch.
You, Bobby? I told you they had this type of capability, and that goddamn privacy bill is just another way for them to expand the power.
And get into your bank statements, computer files, email, listen to your phone calls. See, the government's been in bed with the entire telecommunications industry since the 40s. They've infected everything.
My wife's been saying that for years.
Every wire, every airwave. The more technology you use, the easier it is for them to keep tabs on you.
Tens of millions of foreign nationals living within our borders, and many of these people consider the United States their enemy, and they see acts.
Oh, you shouldn't have. This thing must have cost $12-13. Oh, you shouldn't have. This thing must have...
There you go. 3/22. Now, remember the calendar dates that I just showed you earlier in the show. How the 3/22 kept showing up over and over again between the dates of these films and the major event, Blind 11, as well as the death of some of these actors, release dates of these films. This particular watch he's holding is a Casio. But at the end, he actually has two watches. This is like his active watch, and then his more formal watch is an Omega. And you'll hear them say that here in the script here.
Cost $12-13 easy.
It's completely secure. Copper wire mesh keeps the radio signals out.
So this is Gene Hackman and Will Smith at Gene Hackman's hideout before it got blown up. Talks about a copper mesh keeping the signal out. And this is the clue. The clue about some kind of electronic device that would bring down the building before it imploded. Copper wire mesh. Now, this could also be a clue about the coming Electric Kingdom, because we are now surrounded by copper mesh, aren't we? These Jive Gee Whiz base stations are full of copper. And this is why we saw copper coin shortages in our country, because they tapped into the coins, which I believe these copper was put into the coins to create basically a storage mechanism that they could later tap into. Because copper coins did not used to be filled with copper. This was a modern development where they started putting copper in the core of every coin. Now you can look that up. I'm not going to argue with people about that, because it's right there. They show you. You could just type it in, Google it, and it shows you the history of coins, what they used to be made of in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then how they started putting copper cores in all the coins. Every single coin has a copper core in it. They're like 60, 70, 80% copper in the middle. And then they coat it with like nickel. The penny has the least amount of copper. It's only 2 to 3% copper, and it's just because it's a coating. So they reversed everything. So it makes it look like the pennies are copper because they look copper, but they're really the least amount of copper of all the coins. So what's the best way to store precious metal that you're going to need in the future? Knowing you're going to build an electric kingdom 40, 50 years from now. You hide it in something of value. Why do you think they took the copper out of the pennies? Because people throw pennies away. And they didn't want the pennies going right back into the earth. Do you see what's happening here now? It's an entire plan that these people had. So they took the copper out of the pennies. They're like, people throw those away. Let's store it in nickels, dimes, and quarters. Because people don't throw those away. And then when we're ready to gather up all this copper, we'll just pull it out of circulation. And that's exactly what they did. Melted it down, and they're using it for these base stations. 60,000 base stations they're going to need. Now, some of these base stations are a simple cabinet, an inconspicuous cabinet sitting down on the street level. Some of the base stations are much more extensive, whole buildings, where these Jive G base stations are. Let's keep going with this. We're almost done with this, you guys. I'm glad you guys could all show up to this. This is a very important show. So, how does that fit into some kind of weapon? Well, I don't know exactly how this weapon was created or exactly how it works, but somehow they've been able to use copper to turn things into dust. Dustification. Now, Gene Hackman calls his little hideout here that's surrounded by copper, he calls it a jar. A jar. Weird, right? Why would you call something wrapped in copper a jar? Well, it's because a jar is like a looking glass. A jar is what you put people inside, or things or animals or insects, so you can look at them and you can see them from all angles. So really, this is twofold. It's the surveillance state, the copper mesh, and probably a weapon. Now, let's keep watching here.
I swear I work. It seems strange to you, but this has been my office for 15 years.
Now this guy, this was the first guy who accidentally recorded the murder with his trail cam, looking at birds, right? And here you're going to hear in the background them talking about the future of electric cars. Now remember, this was 1998. I think we only had a couple electric cars on the market. Everybody hated them. Again, another very weird thing to include in a script that has absolutely nothing to do with electric cars, unless you know how to decrypt the true meaning of it.
The electric car is here.
A sedan for you.
What kind of watch is that?
It's an Omega.
A sedan for you.
What kind of watch is that?
It's an Omega.
Of course, Will Smith is the Omega Man. Look in the background. That looks like a spike of protein, doesn't it? I can't really see. It's kind of fuzzy. But we've seen, I'm to the point now where I can see these things out of the corner of my eye, popping up in the Matrix. So, Omega Man confirmed. So the enemy of the state is us, right? Anybody who stands in the way of their agenda. What's their agenda? A worldwide cashless society, trackable currency, debt slavery, and they will just begin to target those people with low tax-based properties, or who are living off the grid, or who have any kind of influence in people listening to them that are against the current system. You will become enemies of the state. I will become an enemy of the state. I probably already am. It's only a matter of time before I become a targeted individual on a real physical level, where they start shutting down bank accounts. They're already doing it to a lot of people, you guys. We've been able to kind of escape it for the most part, but there will come a time where they will make it impossible for me to speak to you. They will target people that are not deceived by voting in the whole voting process. They don't want people telling you that voting isn't real. Why do they do voting? Well, voting tracks sentiment, doesn't it? It tracks how well their programming is working. This is why they even have voting. It's not because they need our consent. It's because they want to track how well they're doing. How well is their Hollywood programming working? How well is their right-left paradigm working? Well, voting tells them how well it's working. They're going to also target anybody who wants to live outside their electric kingdom. You will become a threat. Because that kind of thinking can catch fire. And it can get others to wake up. And when others begin to wake up, that's when the controllers lose their control, isn't it? Many of you will remember Fill the Mall. Remember that? Let's click on it here. Fill them all is what we came up with, didn't we? Catch them all, which is, of course, the tagline to Pokemon. Poke the man, Pokemon. So many of you will remember this 3-hour stream that we did. This isn't the stream here, but we did like a 3-hour live stream of this Fill the Mall event back in 2016. Let me make sure we're connected. We'll keep going with this. Good morning. Let's make sure we're live. Let's just let me know we're live, you guys, and we'll continue on with this. All right. Okay, cool. Thanks, D-Curve. Appreciate it. Fill the Mall. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because it's going to segue into the rest of the show. It's very important that we establish this history of what happened in 2016. Fill the Mall. And basically, we did this 3-hour stream and we covered this National Christian concert at the Crapper Hole Mall, the National Mall, the lawn. And we identified this huge phallic shape in the advertisement here. This is an advertising trailer, I guess you can call it, to get people to show up to this event. Let me play this for you.
So here's the deal. We have the deal.
So the obvious phallic imagery there. So this was their advertising. I should have probably turned the sound off for you guys. I know that was a little bit weird. Let me put it right at the correct speed so you can hear. There's even audio effects here that seem to suggest that there's some subliminals going on here, right? Let's play it back again.
So here's the deal. We have them all, but the hashtag in freaking person. So here's the deal. We have them all, but the parks.
So this was crazy, right? So for those of us that were watching that at the time, we saw that this was some kind of ritual. And I believe that this is when the whole modern unholy alliance between Christianity and the government was consummated. When Christianity officially sold out to the government on the Crapper Hole lawn, bowing to Satan in false worship below the Washington Memorial, which just so happened to be on that day as we were streaming live, was struck by lightning. It was struck several times, actually. Now, this was an all-day concert where the theme was, "Come as you are. All are accepted." Now, that is definitely a theme that Jesus wants us to, talk about and accept when we accept him. But there's a part of that is very important that they left out, which is repentance of your sins, leave your sins behind, accept him, and try to live a better life. At least try to meet your sins head on and let him do the rest of the work to get you to stop doing those sins. He doesn't tell you come as you are and you'll just be accepted and continue on and give in to your sin. That's not how this works. Because then the devil has you, doesn't he? Now, many of you will also remember there was a particular new virtual reality Pokemon app for phones. And this is where they launched this thing. And, of course, Pokemon's all about collecting demons, isn't it? So all these Christians were running around collecting the 72 demons of the Pokemon onto their app. So now you know why I say fill them all really means fill them all and catch them all, which is the Pokemon tagline. Poke the man. Now here we are full circle. And with certainty, based on how the church handled this spam-demic, looking in hindsight, we can now say beyond the shadow of a doubt that the agenda was very clear. It was like they knew what they were planning. And that brings us to the present, when only a few days ago we found another piece to the National Mall puzzle. A giant hypodermic needle. A syringe. So, this of course is the Capitol building. It's a little bit fuzzy. I should have found a better image for you guys. This is that the White House or the Capitol? I always forget. I get the two confused. And there's the surrounding landscape there. And as you can see, it appears as a large syringe. Now, this mall here is where this concert took place. All throughout this central lawn area here is where this concert took place. And as you can see, this is the Washington Monument, the needle, and this is always what it was about. Now, we did a full decode on this. If you're like going, Casey, that's a bit of a stretch, you need to go back to the decode we did on this discovery, because it all pointed to the Lincoln Memorial. And the Lincoln presidency was the presidency under which the syringe was invented, the hollow tip syringe. We linked in Planet of the Apes and everything else with it as well in that decode. Now, so what's this all really about? This giant hypodermic needle syringe. Well, we now know that this is probably synonymous with the phallic imagery that we just saw here. This is a part of the National Mall here. Let's rewind this a little bit so you guys can see this. There it is. And here is that central part. Here is the White House. And that's what this really is. This is also a syringe. It's a phallic going that way, and it's a syringe coming this way, just to give you your bearings. So the two are one and the same, aren't they? And that would make sense, wouldn't it? Something that changes something else by injecting something into it is what's really happening here. Now, it's interesting because Al Pacino, remember he played the devil atop Trump Tower's 66th floor penthouse in The Devil's Advocate? Well, this was his first major role. The Panic in Needle Park. And he plays a heroin addict with this woman. And it tells the whole story. Now, I have not seen this film, but it's interesting, isn't it? All these connections of needles and syringes. And we found the other needle in Lower Manhattan, not far, just a few blocks away from Needle Park. So, weird times, right? Now, one of you guys found something else, and this is what we're going to get in today. This is the San Francisco needle. And what forms the tip of the needle? Well, obviously, it's the Trans-American Pyramid. Gives you a little bit of a snapshot into what they're trying to do with these needles, doesn't it? And this one I found just this morning. One of you guys left a comment and said, hey, Casey, go look at the Transamerica building, see if you see a needle in the landscape. And sure enough, there's a needle here, as you can see here. Now, you can go into Google Earth and do this yourself. All I did was outline these buildings, and I connected that to the pyramid, and it forms a needle. Crazy. Here's the Transamerica building right here. I extended this out, so basically it would be if you toppled over the building, it would form this exact shape. Now, let's go back to you guys. Make sure everybody's starting to come in here. Good. Okay, it looks like our connection's good. Let's keep going with this. because there's even more. You guys found another one. You guys found all these. I didn't go searching around all the towers to see if I could find needles. You're like, Casey, check out Paris. So I looked at Paris. And look what I found. The Eiffel Tower is here. And it too forms the tip of a needle. See this arced building down here? We're going to get into that. It's actually a maritime museum. It was also at a World's Fair. We're going to break all that down today. But you could see that it forms the finger holders or whatever. That's probably not the correct terminology, but these finger grips here curve around in some types of syringes. Right? And even this back part here kind of matches up with these two buildings. And you have the pusher or the plunger back here. Strange times, right? Now, this whole thing raises questions about the Eiffel Tower, doesn't it? Because the Eiffel Tower is alleged to be some kind of antenna. It's depicted that way in television and films. There was one film, I think, with Nikola Tesla in it. And they said that basically the Eiffel Tower was a secret antenna that sent out signals or received signals. I can't remember the exact plot or the exact film in which that appeared, but that's what they said. And so I'm starting to wonder if this infers some kind of relationship between radio frequencies and whatever is in this syringe. Now, this curved building here was originally called the Palace de Trocadero. My French is really bad, but this was the original palace. The Trocadero Palace. And it was built a few years after the invention of the hollow needle syringe, right about the time we were having our Civil War here under Lincoln. This building was built. It was built specifically for the World's Fair. Here's some images of it. Let me zoom these up so you guys can see this. Trocadero Palace. Opposite this, right over here in this area, is the Eiffel Tower that we just looked at in Google Earth. Let's go down here. Now, there's a strange story behind this palace because it was part of a very, very bizarre and weird World's Fair. Here's the Palace de Trocadero, the curved building, and injecting into the Eiffel Tower, which is opposite the river. Here's some information on the Palace de Chaillot, which is this whole complex, including the curved building, the Trocadero building. They made this hill. There's fountains, water, which suggests some kind of fluid going into us from the syringe, right? And this whole thing was a museum, a marine museum. It's all about the water. Now, when did this whole thing get developed? Well, it was developed during this World's Fair, as I told you. Trocadero, let's go to this part here. And that's what we're going to focus on for the next few minutes here. The Exposition Universelle, 1878. Just a decade or two earlier, the hollow syringe was invented and was used extensively in the Civil War to medicate the soldiers who had gotten injured. And many of them became addicts. We read the history about that in a previous show. 500,000 Civil War soldiers became addicts because of the hollow tip needle. We were never meant to inject things into our body because it goes directly into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream is holy, isn't it? It is, the life is in the blood. The Bible says that many, many times. Let's read this here. The third Paris World's Fair, called Exposition Universelle in French, was held from May 1st, which is, of course, the highest day of Illuminati sacrifice. It is their most deadly holiday, May 1st, and it celebrated the recovery of France after the Franco-Prussian War. They talk about the building, how it was constructed and updated during this time. I'm going to show you that here. The Trocadero of the Palais de Chaillot is an area of Paris, France, in the 16th arrondissement across the Seine from the Eiffel Tower. It is also the name of the 1878 palace, which was demolished in 1937 to make way for the Palais de Chaillot. So there's your history on this. Now let's go back to this World's Fair. And this was, like I said, a very weird World's Fair. We had the May 1st, May Day start of the World's Fair. And part of this World's Fair was the head of Apollo, the head of Sol Invictus, Lady Liberty, before it ever made it to America. This was on display. SOL, Sol, Statue of Liberty. Now, weird thing is that this entire fair covered 66 acres, which is, of course, Apollo's number. And commissioners included a guy named Pierce Young. He was a commissioner. He was also a U.S. congressman, Pierce B. Young. There was even a Simeon vase. As you can see here. Of course, Simeon means monkey, doesn't it? Now, not in this context. Obviously, there's no monkeys on here. But you see where all this is headed. The Planet of the Apes, the polio smack scene, and the whole thing. Now, the most troubling aspect of this whole thing was a human zoo. Who was in the human zoo? Africans. One popular feature was a human zoo called an NEGRO village. Now I'm going to show you some images from that, but in hindsight, history has judged this as very, very insensitive and downright racist. Now, there was also Thomas Edison's megaphone or phonograph. And we know, because of previous decodes that we've done, that a phonograph is basically an umbrella and a needle, isn't it? And we saw that symbolism in a Fringe episode, didn't we? In which there was a doctor that had a needle, which we know needles are umbrellas, and he used that to basically turn people into zombies, didn't he? And take their organs out of them in that Fringe episode. So, let's take a look at some of these other images here. Here's a vintage image of the alignment, the syringe, spiritually manifesting in the landscape. Here is the village of this zoo, the human zoo. People on display. Now, if you think I'm reading too much into this, remember that the Planet of the Apes had also a human zoo. Watch.
She keep this. Bad place. Human zoo. Bad place. Human zoo. Bad human.
Bad humans. Soldiers.
They called the coming people a human zoo in Planet of the Apes. The same exact thing that happened at this World's Fair where a giant hypodermic needle appears in the landscape. So there are obvious connections between the apes and the needles, isn't there? No. We're still not convinced. This is Pogo. And he appeared in another series called The Umbrella Academy. And he was basically a self-aware chimpanzee. An advanced chimpanzee because of experiments that were done on him in the series The Umbrella Academy. And one of you reminded me that you had heard Pogo before. Because Pogo is like a pogo stick, which visually resembles a hypodermic needle. This is why I tell you guys, you are amazing, because you guys are the ones that find all this stuff. Sometimes it's hard for me to even keep up with your discoveries that I present to everyone, so everyone can have their eyes opened. Now, all of this brings us to something else that you probably remember. When Britney Spears shaved her head and flipped out and pulled an umbrella out to break the window of paparazzi's car. Now, what makes this weird is that later, let's take a look at some of these images here so we can remember what happened. This was way back in like 2007, I want to say. And like I said, I rarely kind of follow these celebrities unless it relates directly to The Matrix. But many of you remember she shaved her head. This is when she was with Federline. And then she went on some kind of rampage and started breaking windows with an umbrella. Well, get this. She later admitted that this was a role that she was playing and preparing a character for. Let's read this. A few months later, in July 2007, Britney apologized on her website, apologized to the Pop for a stunt that was done 4 months ago regarding an umbrella. I was preparing my character for a role in a movie where the husband never plays his part, so they switch places accidentally. Wow. Switching roles. Switching characters. Switching roles. Are you starting to see what's happening here? This is what the umbrella or the needle is going to do. It's going to cause roles to switch. She then goes on, I take all my roles very seriously. And I got a little carried away. Unfortunately, I didn't get the part. So now we got to look back and find this movie that she was trying to play a role in 2007. And we'll do that after the show. I'm not going to do it here live. But I'm going to find this movie, because this is probably going to tell us everything we need to know about all of this. So now we have baldness, we have umbrellas, all of the things that we're just now discovering in this matrix. We have all of the components of it. Complete. Full circle. Now, as we had discussed in previous shows, we discovered also that ancient Roman mythology says that the goddess Artemis was found under a willow tree with a god named Alopecus, which is where the word alopecia probably came from, which means baldness. We also found that willow trees represent hair. Well, look at this. Brand new movie being filmed right now. Scarlett Johansson, Chris Evans, and it's going to be directed by Bateman. The film's called Project Artemis. Now, there's not much about this film out there. They are saying that it is going to be based on the space program and going back to the moon. Listen.
That is being kept tightly under wraps. We got a bit of information. We heard it's created against the space race. The film is taking influence from NASA's Project Artemis. It is NASA's Project Artemis. So this will be a project to watch.
what they're going to do to make us believe that they are going back to the moon. So, I kept following the rabbit hole trail. And that triggered me to screen the film Artemis Fowl. Many of you had asked me to screen this in the past, and I put it off and I put it off. And finally, I watched it. Now, there wasn't much in this film about syringes or baldness or monkeys. There was none of that symbolism in there. But let me tell you what there was symbolism of in this film. It was loaded with symbolism about Earth portals to hell and the Middle Earth, the Hollow Earth. Now, as you're going to see in these clips, these portals include column basalt tree stumps and volcanoes and trees. So let me give you the backdrop of Artemis Fowl before we get into this. Artemis is a boy, and he's really smart. In fact, they make him smarter than all the adults in the film, even smarter than his father. His father is played by Colin Farrell. What does Colin Farrell's name mean? The ferrule is the tip of the umbrella. In fact, Colin Farrell also played another umbrella man. He played a bald penguin in one of the Batman movies. So, in Artemis Fowl, he ends up getting kidnapped by an entity from the fairy realm. This is all about fairies and dwarves and all this stuff. And they all live in the Middle Earth, the Hollow Earth. And this entity that kidnaps Artemis Fowl Sr., Colin Farrell, the Umbrella Man, the entity basically wants this object called the Aculos. The Aculos has magical powers that could spell the end of civilization if it were in the wrong hands. So, this entity makes a deal with Artemis Jr., which is the little Artemis, and she says, hey, if you go find this Oculos and bring it back, I'll let your dad go. So, in this film, the fairies of the underworld, Hollow Earth, also want the acorn Oculus as well for themselves, because that's who the rightful owners are of this thing. And they basically descend on Fowl Manor to retrieve the Aculos. And this is where we get into portals, because the film suggests several mechanisms of travel to portal from the underworld to the surface. Like I said, trees, volcanoes, and column basalt tree stumps. Let's watch this.
Because their world, it's too well hidden.
Do you see the standing stones?
In my father's journal, he wrote of a fairy who would periodically visit the oak tree on the hill of Tara. Their world, it's too...
These standing stones here. We were just talking about this, weren't we? We were just talking about these standing stones as portals, weren't we? We did the whole Outlander series, and the stones of Callanish, just 77 degrees away from where Thump's mother was born, in Scotland. And here they are depicted once again as portals in this film. Let's keep watching here.
Well hidden. In my father's...
See the tree here and the acorn? Now the fairies live down here, and their portal is the acorn. Well, they have other ways of getting up to the surface, but here it's depicted as the acorn down here, in the root system of the tree coming up. What you're going to see next is column basalt. Again, something we had identified years ago as portals to the underworld. Now, when I began to do these decodes on these column basalt structures, and I realized that they were portal tree stumps, I got a lot of pushback from naysayers. I had people telling me, Casey, the work you do on this column basalt, being tree stumps, it really negates the rest of your work because it's so ridiculous and you should just stop talking about it. This is what I was told by a lot of people. And I said, you don't understand. This is a spiritual revelation. And though I don't know anything for sure, I could tell you this. When you have packed columnar basalt in perfectly packed hexagonal matrices, that's not a natural phenomenon. I don't care what you tell me. That's not created by lava and magma coming out of the ground, especially when they're in the perfect shape of a tree stump. And at the very least, let's say they were created by the magma. Well, what's to say that the volcano is still not a tree stump? What's to say it isn't? It could be, but its sap is not sap at all. It's molten rock. And so you got to think outside the box, and this is where the nested reality helps us understand things, because things are very similar to other things. There is very little in nature that is just a standalone shape or an object or discovery. Everything looks like something else. It's called the nested reality. And once you begin to understand that, you can solve some of these mysteries with the help of the Holy Spirit.
Journaled, he wrote of a fairy who would periodically visit the oak tree on the hill of Tara.
We have a problem.
Here's the column basalt behind this guy. He's basically the technician that allows people to travel through the portals. He's the gatekeeper. And in behind him, spinning around him, is the columnar basalt complexes.
One of ours is unaccounted for on the surface.
Here you see it over here on this side.
Could be a deep tunnel breakout. Perhaps through
Here you see it there.
vault or dormant volcano.
Send someone up to identify it.
Through a vault or a dormant volcano. This is how they travel. This is why you see UFOs and demonic spirits and lightning striking these places, because there's spiritual activity going on.
Perhaps through a vault or dormant volcano.
Send someone up to identify it.
One of ours is unaccounted for on the surface.
Elf, dwarf, goblin.
Hard to tell, but it's big.
Now, so this is why you see these column basalt complexes appearing regularly in these films, nested in themes about interdimensional travel and portals. Remember Gulliver's Travels we decoded with Jack Black? And there was a columnar basalt complex. Remember the series Raised by Wolves? And there was a columnar basalt complex where Sol Invictus was? Are you starting to see what's happening here? Now, the only reason why we recognize all this stuff is because we're watching it and putting it all together. Most people, this goes right over their heads. They don't see the patterns. They don't see the forest from the trees, pun intended. But we do, because we're looking at it and because we care about the spiritual realm. We care about exposing evil. Now, in this scene, one of the fairies gets into a magma portal to come up through a volcano to the surface.
This is the quickest way we can take you to the surface, so pay attention. You'll be sitting on 200,000 tons of molten lava, traveling at over 600 miles an hour.
Now remember, they're going to the surface to try to retrieve the aculos, the acorn, and this is what it looks like. Wow, right?
The most powerful treasure in the fairy world.
So there it is. That's the aculos, the acorn of a tree. It's all about interdimensional travel. So this is what I basically had for you guys in terms of Artemis Fowl. This was like one of the lamest movies I ever watched. It was a very poorly written superhero movie. And again, it kind of irritated me because here you have children smarter than adults and ruling the world. And that to me is blasphemy. Okay. Now, unless you want to bore yourself into a coma, I would not recommend watching this film. There's not even really much else to decode about it other than what I just showed you. And as you can see, we just took care of it in a 1 minute and 24-second montage.
Step back, Mr. Diggums.
It's real. It's perfect.
The Aculos.
So that's Artemis Fowl, and it was a foul movie, just to let you know. The needle at the top left of the screen looks like an upside down umbrella. Yeah, and you're going to see that. You're going to see the umbrella and the needle dovetailing in together, looking the same, because they are one and the same. They're one and the same. Now, something weird. I was looking at the top of Thump Tower. Done some decodes on that. Thump Tower is a 666 what do they call it? Pyramid, numerically. So visually, you can actually take the number 666 and all the numbers that add up to 666, and it forms a pyramid. So this is the devil's triangular number. As you can see, all they did was take all the numbers that add up to 666 and they put them in this pyramid. This is exactly how it visually looks. Well, this is the same shape that Thump Tower is. There's less of these steps in it. I think there's only 7 steps in his, but it's the same concept. Now you know why it was the Devil's Advocate was filmed there and The Dark Knight, the Batman movie. Because it's always been about that from the beginning. And we did a full video on this, the Devil's Triangular Number and Thump Tower and all that. Again, a lot of people love men out there. And so they were very offended that I would uncover this kind of, occult meaning in his Thump Tower architectural design. I even had people telling me, well, he didn't build it. An architect came up with the design. So a lot of people in denial. And that's what saddens me because, until you wake up to this stuff, you're always going to be deceived. There you see the similarities between the triangular number, 666 number. Now you can't just take any number and do this triangular pyramid with this. It has to be 666. It can't be 527. It can't be 422. It has to be 666. And there you see, it's visually similar to the Thump Tower. Now, this also looks kind of like an umbrella, doesn't it? Stick a stick right through the middle there and you have an umbrella. Albeit a triangular umbrella, but still the basic shape of an umbrella. So now we're starting to see the bigger picture here. That the penguin in his umbrella in sub-zero temperatures, the bald penguin, really he's holding a syringe, isn't he? Yes, he is. A bat syringe. So really, the penguin is one and the same with Batman, isn't he? And we know that Batman is Thump. They're one and the same. They always have been. We just didn't see it until now. There have been some new developments with the umbrella syringe matrix. And what are the new developments? Well, the Umbrella Academy TV series. And this is what we're going to break down today. So let me get you caught up first on the umbrella syringe smack scene matrix. And then we'll get into the Umbrella Academy series. So, based on our work so far and revelations by the Holy Spirit and all of the work that you guys have sent in, we've decoded that the umbrellas are syringes. Now, they also look like bats when they're opened, don't they, from the side view? And that was another revelation that came from you guys. And I was like, wow, that has significance because all this talk has been about bats and snakes, hasn't it? Now, interestingly, what you're looking at your screen here is called the Guinness clock from the London Fair in 1951. Now, Guinness was into Alice in Wonderland, as you can see here. And he actually incorporated characters from Alice in Wonderland into this Guinness Festival clock that we're going to break a little bit down before we get into the Umbrella Academy. He incorporated the Mad Hatter into this clock. So let's take a look at this clock because this is very bizarre. There's a man with an umbrella in it, and that's why we're talking about this clock today. And one of you actually sent this in. If you're in the chat right now, please call yourself out so you can take credit for this find. And you notice that there were all the elements that we've been talking about over the past 2 weeks. The umbrella, the syringe, the serrated buzz saw or circular saw. All incorporated into elements of this clock, this Guinness clock. Let's take a look at some of these pictures. Here you see on the right the serrated buzzsaw sun, the umbrella. Remember, this looks like a bat from the side view, and a syringe at the bottom. Now, this syringe at the bottom is hidden. It's not an actual syringe, but it's in the shape of a syringe. So, we've got this Guinness Alice in Wonderland Festival clock. And you have the Mad Hatter, and I believe the Mad Hatter is this guy here poking out from the top here. And look at this. It even says Guinness in Festival Land in this little poem from this period piece. The walrus and the carpenter were walking hand in hand. They strolled across the river Thames from halfway round down the Strand. Guinness in Festival Land. So there's something here, isn't there? Here's a black and white image. This almost looks like a spider up here, doesn't it? This thing rotates around. I've got a video of this that we're going to take a look at in Vimeo. We can actually see this thing in action. 1951. Now, back in history, during 1951, I think this was just before the polio spam-demic is when this popped off. Here's a color image, and there you see the serrated edge sun, the sawtooth sun, above the umbrella, above the syringe, all in one line. And to the left, the Mad Hatter comes out of this house, and he catches what appears to me to be fish within fish, fish eating fish. Of course, this is the nested reality that we've talked about and discovered, that things in this reality are always things within things. And through that truth, you can actually decode and decrypt this reality, and as well as meanings of things. Because sometimes things mean things within inside of things, don't they? As we had discovered. So, you've got the Mad Hatter popping out of this house, catching fish within fish. Now, here's where things get crazy, because if you look at this serrated edge sun, I'm going to remind you of where we had seen this before. And that is inside this machine called the willowing machine. You can see it right here. The willowing machine. Let me back this out so you guys can see this. All right. Now this is one such machine for sale on Alibaba. Willow machine, as you can see there, it says right there. And as you can see in here, there are these spikes, these serrated edge spike cylinders. And these are used to do what? They're used to whip the wool. It's also used to whip the cotton. And why do they do this? They do this to remove the impurities. Whipping of the wool. Now, in fact, Willow Smith, which is Will Smith's daughter, she probably got the idea of whipping her hair from an ancient Ethiopian ritual. What is the ritual? It's called the Oromo dance of the whipping of the hair. Now, this ancient ritual, I'm going to show you just a part of this, was done by the Oromo people of Ethiopia. Oromo tribe is from the Kushite tribe, the Cushitic ethnic group. Now, I'm not making any assumptions about this group based on their roots, but we all know who Cush was. Cush was the son of Ham, father of Nimrod, from which the entire bloodline of the pharaohs likely came. Mithra, right? And Mizraim. Mizraim was the son of Ham as well, and brother to Cush. The pharaohs actually came out of the Mizraim bloodline. In fact, Mizraim is translated as Egypt in the Old Testament. It was the very first mention of the word Egypt in the entire Bible was the name Mizraim of Egypt. So there's something going on here, isn't there? Let's watch a little bit of this. I'm going to mute the sound here. But this is the hair whipping ritual of the Oromo people. This is an ancient ritual. So there you go. She's whipping her hair back and forth. We already know what the Willow machine is. We know Willow Smith is, who shaved her head. Shaving of the wool ritual. It's the shearing of the wool. Now this other lady gets on here, and she is, I mean, this is crazy. Let's watch some of this. This reminds me of like possession, okay? Spirit possession. People do this, and some of these rituals, I'm not saying this one is, but some of these, this is the type of thing people do when they're allowing a spirit to enter their body. You see this translate into some of the voodoo religions. You see this whipping of the head and this trance state that they go into. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that this is what these people are doing. I'm saying that this is the type of thing you would do if you were to allow this to happen. To allow a spirit to enter you in some of these voodoo religions. Probably where they learned it from. Now we know that the hair is a pathway of connection to the Holy Spirit, but it could also be a pathway in connection to the dark spirits of the dark realm. Our hair is a pathway, isn't it? And, you can imagine that whipping the hair like this would activate all of the follicles of the hair on your head to maybe receive something. So this could be the mechanism. Now I'm speaking in theory here. I don't know any of this for a fact, but these are just observations based on our research. So, the whipping of the hair, the Oromo people, the Cushites. Now, what else do we have here? Oh, I wanted to show you this. Let me turn the music off here. Let's see. How do we turn the music off here? Well, we don't need to turn the music off. Let me show you this, and I'll just scan through it. But this is the actual clock, the Guinness clock. Actual video. Look at that. There's the sawtooth. And you really have to see this because it fits into this sawtooth willowing machine, the whipping of the wool, doesn't it? As you see the sun spinning around in a circle like a sawtooth blade. There's the umbrella. There's the Mad Hatter catching the fish within fish. Now that could be a mockery, Christ mockery, because Christ caught a bunch of fish, didn't he? The spider-like, hydra-like, spinning, whatever you call that. I forget what they call those. What's that called when these are like these things are what spin around over a baby's head in a crib, right? Somebody can help me probably with the name. Now when I first saw that, I thought they were flying monkeys. There might be a monkey or two here, which would be another confirmation, right? So there's something here, isn't there? There's something here. Now, how do I know we're onto something? Well, the Bible compares Jesus to a silent lamb who was being sheared. The silence of the lambs. Here it is in Acts 8:32. Now the place in the book where he was reading was this: he was taken like a sheep, to be put to death, and as a lamb is quiet when its wool is being cut, so he made no sound. This must be where the silence of the lambs came from. Again, Christ's mockery. So, it's appearing to me that this whole shearing of the sheep is the shearing of our connection and the preparation for death. This is what this shaved head ritual is at its core. Now, I want to be sure to let you guys know that this isn't about every single person that shaves their head. That's not what I'm saying. A lot of people shave their head on the show. I don't want you to go away, all freaked out, going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Maybe I should stop doing this. No, it's not about you. This is about the elite and their symbolism and their magic and sorcery that they're casting upon us. They know exactly what they're doing. You don't get a person at the top who is controlled by the elite, controlled by Satan himself. They have millions and millions of followers. Hollywood, they've got controllers in place. You don't have a woman with perfectly good hair shaving their head. Why would they do that? Because they were told to do it. And that's what I'm talking about here. Not judgment upon you and me and the people that had no idea that this even existed. If anything, you might be a victim of the sorcery and the programming, which might have caused you to want to do this, to shave your head. And that was between you and God. You have to pray going, oh, well, did I shave my head because Bruce Willis did it and I think it looked great on him? And because he's part of this as well, as we demonstrated. His very last role, Bruce Willis's very last role, was a mute swan. His character's name was Swan. This is his last role before he lost his ability to speak. So all these people are involved with this, and they projected this programming and sorcery onto the rest of us, and this shapes our lives. And this is why you got to be careful about seeking after these people who have these riches and influence, all these things, because you could be led the wrong way. Now, let's get back to this willowing machine. Let me check in with you guys first. I always hit you guys with these crazy shows on Monday, don't I? Make sure you guys are with me. Looks like you guys are. Now, let's keep going with this, because there's a lot more to this. Because we covered the willowing machine. Well, it's also called a willying machine. Okay, Willie, Will Smith. And this thing has actually been called a devil, because it's also called a twilly. A machine for cleansing and loosening wool by the action of a revolving cylinder covered with long iron spikes or teeth. A willy or willing machine, called also a twilly devil and devil. Now, there was a reference. Look at this. It's even got the lupus and wolf in this list of things that are in line with this. The wolf. Now, I don't know how the wolf fits in here, but it's listed here. Black wolf, lupus, lupercalia. Interesting. The willing machine. Now, for those of you that are researchers like myself, all of these links will be in the pinned comment, because I want you to double check my work. So, now this brings us to the film, or the series, I'm sorry, The Umbrella Academy. So several of you asked me to look at this series because you felt as though it fit into this matrix that we'd uncovered over the last few weeks, and you were absolutely right. There is in fact a syringe component to this series. The Umbrella Academy. Here's the logo, as you can see here. The rain falling on the bat-shaped umbrella, which is a hypodermic needle, remember. If you're unsure about the connection there, look at the previous shows we've done on the umbrella is a syringe. But here it is. And let me give you a little bit of the backdrop of this series before we get into some of this. Here's an actual scene from the film, a GIF, or a scene from the series. I keep calling it a film. Look at the bloody hands, the syringe. This guy passes out. So, they're the founder of the Umbrella Academy. He's this doctor, and he does experiments on chimps, and it results in pregnant women spontaneously spawning children with superpowers. The doctor then finds those children, and 7 of them he asks to come live at the Umbrella Academy, he calls it. Let's take a look at this.
As mentioned earlier, Hargreaves purchased an umbrella business in 1928, and from here he built his fortune.
So there you saw the Umbrella Academy, or the Umbrella store. Okay, that he walks up on it right here. Let me zoom this up for you. This is the doctor, and this is his store. I looked around in this image to see if there was any other things, any other clues that I could find about this. You do see lots of fruit here, because we are the fruit. This is the big joke. And let's keep watching.
Built his fortune. We learn in the 1950s and 60s that the character began to contribute to our space division. At this point he emerged once more after learning that 43 women had mysteriously given birth to children after showing no signs of pregnancy.
So 43 women give birth to children after no signs of pregnancy.
Though Hargreaves tried to adopt all of them, he was only able to procure 7, and these became known as the Umbrella Academy. Now, though this is never confirmed, it is possible that Hargreaves was actually the cause behind the pregnancies.
So, there you heard, and they're inferring that this was the cause behind the pregnancies. Let's keep watching here.
And that due to his experiments on simians, he was able to manufacture children with great gifts. This has never been confirmed, but it's just a theory I've had since we found out that he was an alien in the comic books.
So, it appears as though he just said that because of these experiments on monkeys, this is how he was able to birth in this super race of children. Now, to me, this has polio all over it. Let's play the rest of this out, and then we'll talk about the original polio smack scene.
He wished to use the group to avert the apocalypse, but due to his treatment of them, they left the academy, all except for Luther, who carried out a mission to the moon, though this eventually turned out to be pretty pointless. Now, Hargreaves committed...
So, let's get into this whole polio aspect to all of this. Now, simian means monkey, as you just heard, and the original polio smack scene was cultured in monkeys. And this caused all kinds of problems. It caused all kinds of problems when simian flu infected the smack scenes. Many people developed life-threatening diseases. Now, this is all public history, as you can see here. But doesn't all of this remind you of the Planet of the Apes? Let's read about smack scene contamination of the polio smack scene. Smack scene contaminated with simian virus, known as SV40, occurred in the U.S. and other countries between 1955 and 1961. SV40 is a monkey virus that has a potential to cause cancer in animals and humans, although this is considered very unlikely. There have been no known human cases. Well, according to them, there have been no known human cases. We know how that works. How can you make the connection? You can't, unless somebody admits there's a connection, right? Soon after its discovery, SV40 was identified in early batches of the oral form of the polio smack scene. The smack scene in which SV40 was found were produced between 55 and 61. The contamination may have been in the original seed strain or in the substrate, primary kidney cells from infected monkeys that were used to grow the smack scene. Yes, they grew the polio smack scene inside of the monkeys. Both the Sabin smack scene and the Salk smack scene were affected. Technique used to inactivate the polio virus in the Salk smack scene by means of formaldehyde did not reliably kill SV40. contaminated smack scene continued to be distributed in the public through 1963. Because according to them, nobody died from it. Nobody got cancer. But believe it or not, if you look back in the history books, there are many papers and studies saying that people were affected by this. It was difficult to detect small quantities of virus until the advent of polymerase chain reaction. Since then, stored smack scene samples of the after 1962 have been tested negative for SV40. So this is what's going on. This is history. Okay. Now, let's back up a little bit here. Because, in fact, there is a talking of a chimp in the Umbrella Academy, as you just saw in the last few moments of this. They show a chimp here. The chimp's name is Pogo, and he's actually developed by the Doctor. Doctor actually develops this chimp, and the chimp has the ability to speak. Let me show you the image of Pogo the chimp. There he is right here, holding the umbrella at the Umbrella Academy. So, there's Planet of the Apes overtones, aren't they? Now, all of this brings us to Washington, D.C., in the Lincoln Memorial, as you see right here, which of course features prominently in the Planet of the Apes film. This is the Lincoln Memorial right here, and this features prominently in the Planet of the Apes film when the timeline is rewritten, and the Lincoln Memorial and Lincoln himself has the face of an ape instead of the president. Now here's where things get spooky. Because the Civil War was a peculiar time in history. Because it was at that time that the hypodermic needle was invented. Let's look it up here. I think it's actually in this study here. Sorry, guys. As you can see here, let's back this up. This is History Collection. Civil War physicians might not have known about antiseptic practices to prevent infections. However, thanks to the recent invention of the hypodermic needle, coupled with the discovery of morphine decades earlier, they could at least do something to ease the pain of wounded soldiers. When hypodermic needles and morphine were not available, opium pills were in plentiful supply, at least in Union hospitals. So, this is when specifically hollow needles were invented. Syringes had been around, but hollow needles was the invention that allowed these soldiers to become addicts. In fact, these addicts were readily identifiable by a small bag dangling from a leather thong around their neck containing morphine in tablets and hypo needles. And they estimate that 400,000 Civil War people became addicts because of their wartime experiences. Something here, isn't there? Absolutely. Now, what else is going on here? Well, let's go back and let me play for you what I found in Washington, D.C. The hypodermic needle emerges, look at this, emerges out of the landscape supernaturally and spiritually. It was always about the hypodermic needle, wasn't it? This is the Capitol building here. And it points through the mall, the Capitol Mall. Remember Fill the Mall? Remember the video we did? We live streamed that whole concert, and it was one big ritual. And then the point of the needle being the Washington Monument. And the entire thing terminates with the Lincoln Memorial at the tip of the needle. The pit is the tip. And this is when the hollow needle was invented, right before the Civil War, to inject the soldiers who were dying when their limbs were blown off. And those who survived became addicts. The very scene out of Planet of the Apes with the monkey-faced Lincoln. You guys, something happened during that time. Something happened during that time. It was the beginning of the modern era of jabbing people with needles, wasn't it? I believe that it was. Unbelievable. So, let's keep going here because there's even more to this. Now, we know that the name syringe is derived from syrinx, don't we? Let's go back to that. Syringe is derived from syrinx. Who is syrinx? She was the Artemis nymph who was turned into hollow reeds. And later, she was used for Pan's pipes. Pan took the hollow reeds and turned them into his pipes. And in fact, Pan's pipes are called syringe or syrinx. Now, this whole thing was immortalized in a song called The Temples of the Syrinx by the band Rush. Here it is right here. Here's one cover. I believe this is from the Temple of the Syrinx. It was on this album, 2112. Many of you remember that. There are very damaging lines as well in the lyrics of this song. Here's one of the singles album covers. This almost looks like the Slim Tower, doesn't it? Almost. The Temples of the Syrinx. This is a very long time ago, but yet you see all the symbolism. Now, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but this is the simian flu spamdemic. This was actually the cause of the Planet of the Apes. Basically, the apes learned to talk, and then man devolved into not being able to talk. The simian flu spamdemic was a catastrophic flu outbreak that resulted in the near extinction of humanity and the evolution of all apes on Earth. The spamdemic resulted from drug testing done on Genesis Laboratories, a biotech company that sought to create a cure for Alzheimer's. So, this actually really happened in real life. Of course, the Planet of the Apes films came after this contamination of the polio vaccine, but as you can tell, the storyline is probably based on that. So, here's the story. He tested it on a female chimpanzee named Bright Eyes. Lucifer? Bright Eyes? Bright Eyes gained heightened intelligence in the process, but went on a rampage, believing her newborn child would be threatened by her captives. Bright Eyes unfortunately was executed shortly after the attack. Will, has to be Will, right? Feeling sorry for her, abandoned newborn son, adopted the baby chimp and called him Caesar, after his father. Quoted Julius Caesar. Caesar was shown to have inherited heightened intelligence from his mother and proved to be smarter than his human counterparts. When Will tested the ALZ-112 on his father seemed to have improved, but his dementia returned after his immune system fought off the ALZ-112. Meanwhile, Will managed to produce an entirely new potential cure called ALZ-113. This cure gave apes an even higher and greater sense of intelligence, and due to this fact, Will attempted to test 113 on his father, but Charles refused and died soon after. Will discovered that 113 had been recklessly being tested on other chimps, ordered by his boss, Stephen Jacobs, ignoring Will's warnings about the risks he is taking. So, there's a whole storyline behind this. We're not going to read all this, but suffice it to say, there's something here, isn't there? Whoa, they talk about What? I didn't read this part. Belarus and Yugoslavia? Wow. Very close to where everything is happening right now in the world. Mentions of biolabs and everything. Interesting. Wow. NATO? Are you kidding me? Let's zoom this out. We might need to read through this part. Spread. Okay, so you guys, this is happening right now. After Caesar and the apes escaped into the Muir Woods, Hunsaker, who had his finger bandaged, arrived to work at San Francisco airport. It was shown that Hunsaker was dripping blood from his nose. A day after Monkeygate, the confirmed deaths of 8 people from the virus in San Francisco prompted the CDC and the WHO to declare a medical emergency and implement quarantine procedures. The U.S. Secretary of Health gave a public speech. Those who with a fever or sore throat should stay home. Hospitals and emergency rooms soon became flooded with patients who were showing signs of the 113, which was dubbed the simian flu. Less than a week later, the nationwide death toll reached 250,000, with no sign of a cure. San Francisco went into chaos, with citizens overwhelming hospitals and looting pharmacies. The breakdown of law and order resulted in the intervention of the National Guard and FEMA, and a terrorist group called Alpha Omega. Wow, remember all the Apollo decodes that we did on Alpha and Omega, because Apollo wants to be the Alpha and the Omega. Apollo brings disease and he cures it, doesn't he? According to ancient mythology. Once the connection between the virus and the escaped evolved apes became public knowledge, rioting mobs broke into various zoos and began killing apes. The old world fared no better than the new. Apart from San Francisco, major cities across the globe saw widespread rioting and looting. Containment of the virus was futile, and U.S. President Barack Obama organized evacuation routes. Is this real? This can't be real. In Belarus, an understaffed nuclear power plant went into meltdown. That would be, wow, Wormwood. What? Guys, this is everything we've been talking about. Wow. Chernobyl, Wormwood. While former Yugoslavia, fighting broke out between Serbs and Croats, with similar conflicts being reported among the Israelites and Palestinians in the Levant. Chinese government went on a brutal crackdown of rebelling ethnic minorities in eastern China while fighting broke out. So, the world is a stage, isn't it? By now, NATO and other organizations attempted to control the rioting and anarchy. So, there you go, you guys. All written out. The script has been set for the future. Now, let's do a little bit of summary here. We have chimps. We have a simian flu. We have Lincoln at the memorial. We've got a big needle, which appears to be the center of it all, as you can see here. We have umbrellas. We have human-chimp mutations. Wow. A giant syringe appears in the landscape. Now, we had done 2 other syringe videos. We found a syringe needle. That video is sitting at like 6,000 views, so apparently the word is not getting out. We did a second video called The World's Second Largest Needle, and that was the Space Needle in Seattle. Well, I think this is probably the king of all needles right here. Pointing to the precise point in history where the Hollow Needle was invented and what it would be used for in the Civil War. And that all of this was pointing, literally, pun intended, to the future of what they had in store for us. Continuous poking and jabbing and poking